And we're live. Welcome everybody to today's live stream event with Randall Arendt, sponsored by Hays County in coordination with Texas State University's Department of Geography and Planning and the Greater Austin Contractors and Engineers Association. This event is live and being recorded. It will be available on the project website at haysconservation.com after today's event. So you can look at it anytime at haysconservation.com after today. Many of you sent in questions for Randall today, and we can't wait to get to those. You can also comment and ask questions on our YouTube page by clicking the YouTube icon on your screen. Thank you all for coming today. I'm Kara Bishop-Buffington, co-founder of GAP Strategies and a member of the project team. With us today is, of course, Randall Arendt, who will be introduced in a moment. Also with me is my business partner, Jeff Barton, Hays County Commissioner Precinct 3, Lon Shell, and Hays County Commissioner Precinct 4, Walt Smith. Commissioner Shell, would you like to introduce Mr. Arendt and introduce the event?
Yeah, thank you, Kara. Again, this is Lon Shell, Precinct 3 Commissioner in Hays County. First of all, I just want to thank our team led by Jeff Barton, GAP Strategies. We've got a great team put together for this project and super excited to get started on it. All the things we get to do as county commissioners, not all of them are as fun as this. Trust me, this is going to be a lot of fun and very excited to get together. I know it's been some challenging times, and so this format I think is the best that we can do. We wish we could do it in person, but with COVID-19 and everything, I think this is the best way to go. And I think you'll find that this is it's going to be a very good program. And we're going to hear from someone that many of us that do what I do look up to. I've read several of Randall's books. One of the books was given to me by our development service director soon after I first appeared at the county almost 10 years ago. So it's very exciting for me, and I know it's very exciting for a lot of our staff to get to work with someone that has this type of experience. Randall Arendt is the founding president of Greener Prospects and senior conservation advisor at the National Natural Lands Trust in Media, Pennsylvania. He's a former director of planning and research at the Center for Rural Massachusetts, University of Massachusetts at Amherst, where he also served as an adjunct professor in the Department of Landscape Architecture and Regional Planning. In 2003, he was elected a fellow of the Royal Town Planning Institute in London. And in 2004, he was elected as an honorary member of the American Society of Landscape Architects. He's written many books, and I would encourage all of you to look up his books. You can get them online and take a look for yourself. But a lot of them have so much value to the conversation that we're going to have today and in the future as we work for this project. Randall, you can take it from here.
Well, thank you, Lon. Well, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. I'm going to be speaking about one of my favorite topics, how to blend development with conservation. A good developer friend of mine in Minnesota calls it twice green. Green environmentally and green economically. I've often described it as the golf course development without the golf course, because a lot of people understand that golf courses are very successful kinds of development, and they're successful because of the green space. And you've never seen a golf course development anywhere, anytime, where the golf course was an afterthought. It's the first thing that is designed. So when I approach conservation subdivision design, the rule number one is to begin with the open space. As if I were a golf course developer, I would put down the open space first, and then I would situate the homes around it for added value and marketability and livability. And then I'd run the street system to connect all the houses. And fourthly, I'd put in the lot lines. And really, this is not the way that most subdivisions are designed. They really begin with streets and lot lines and kind of end there. So this is not such a new way of doing things, because golf course development designers have been doing it for 50 years, if not more. So rather than spend, say, $10 million creating a golf course in a country clubhouse, and then trying to make a profit after spending all that money, a conservation subdivision developer can reap the benefits of having the added value of the homes, the lot premiums of the homes near the open space, without spending much money at all on improving the open space. And the farm field remains as it is, the woodlands remain as they are, the wetlands remain as they are. One would put in some trails, maybe some recreational facilities for young people in the homes, but really very, very little expense goes into the open space. but the open space provides huge benefits economically through the lot premiums that they generate. So without too much further ado, I'd like to press the magic button and down below, which is the screen share, and the blue tab, which is share. And here we go with the slide presentation called Conservation Subdivisions, Protecting Resources Through Creative Development in Hays County. Let's see. Okay. We've heard just a little bit about the books I've written, and they're not important except as background. Many of the examples I'll be showing today are from the Rural by Design, Conservation Design for Subdivisions, and Growing Greener, which are really the basis for understanding all of this, and it's pretty much common sense. And where I like to begin is historically. This is Bozeman, Montana, and down in the lower half, you can see a park laid out in the grid, well before there are any homes built around it. So this was pre-planning, done maybe 125 years ago. So municipalities were planning ahead way back then in a way that many of them don't do today. They laid out the park, knowing that the park would add value and create a greater community. And that's what the park looks like today, surrounded by houses. Hooper Park in Bozeman, and on the ground level, it looks like this. Lockwood Park is another example of that. That's and Dignowity, they're a pair that exist in San Antonio. And this is a Google aerial of what they look like. Again, the park adds value to all the homes around it, even though the lots are smaller, which is the way we do it in conservation subdivisions. We trim the lots so the aggregate of all the savings on lot size can go into the open space that adds value to everybody. This is in Austin. It's Hemp Hill Park, dating from about 100 years ago, say the 1920s. The area looks like this, and it is a very nice neighborhood. This type of neighborhood can be done for much lower price points than we would find there. So don't think that conservation subdivisions are only for people that can afford a very expensive home. Hemp Hill Park didn't begin that way, but over the years has grown to be that way. And it's a delightful place, and we can create that again anywhere, anytime, really. Bradfield Village Park is an example of pretty much the same thing in Buda. And the difference is here, this is a floodplain where you wouldn't want to put houses anyway, but it's a great place for, tossing a frisbee, flying a kite, having a game of touch football, walking the dog, that kind of thing. Another vision of Bradfield Village Park. This is the sort of thing we could create even when there is no floodplain. We take some of the buildable land and set it aside for development without reducing the number of lots, without reducing the number of houses. Rio Vista Park, which is in San Marcos, is kind of a linear greenway, pretty much the same idea. And conservation subdivisions in communities that have adopted it for 10 or 15 or 20 years begin to see the open space in each conservation subdivision joining together and linking up into a greater park system taken together. Plum Creek Dog Park in Kyle is another good example. Mostly floodplain here, but again, in conservation subdivision design, we would simply say, let's put the houses over here and the open space over there, just like a developer does. Most golf courses are not in floodplains. And Fergus Park is an extension to Plum Creek Dog Park, and that you can see how much the houses cluster around the trees and the open space, being far more valuable than homes in a development with none of that. Here's another sort of aerial view of Fergus Park in Kyle. Now here's a design of a cover that I redid about 10 years ago to show how this idea could be adapted into subdivision regulations. The actual cover that I started with looked like that. And it really didn't offer much. If you can see, and you probably can't, the cul-de-sac near the pond is called Mirror Pond Walk. That's the name of the cul-de-sac. And ironically, you cannot walk to Mirror Pond from Mirror Pond Walk because the pond is landlocked with lots. And instead of the value of the pond being limited to the 6, 7, 8 homes that border it, with the conservation subdivision design, the value of the pond and the park go to all 40 homes in the development, much as it does in Hemp Hill Park and Bradfield Village Park and Fergus Park, the ones that I've shown you in the last few minutes. When we look at this, we try to figure out at the very beginning, which landscape features should we design around and save? So these are some photographs from Hays County of typical properties, and we see a lot there that could be saved to add value, and we see a lot of opportunities for development. That farmhouse might become, say, a community center or a clubhouse for this development. Whether it's ponds or trees or meadows or pastures, there's a lot to be thought about as value adding open space. Now, the 3 to 5 acre lots that are typical in rural Hays County are pretty much too large to mow and really way too small to ranch. So they're in this no man's land. And we see land just chewed up and the houses going further out in the countryside and no one having really anything but too much land to mow and not enough land to ranch. So it's kind of the worst of both worlds. And this unmanaged land within these large house lots attracts invasives. And we're all familiar with some of these invasives. And there are good reasons to manage that land. Pre-identifying potential conservation areas before the land is subdivided is key to this development technique. And here's a community I worked with in the Philadelphia suburbs out in the country in Chester County, and they pre-identified black land there as being unbuildable, it's wet. And then the green land as being potentially savable farmland, and the yellow being potentially savable woodland. So we have these choices, the broad choices. Shall we build on the farmland and save the woods and the habitat and the wildlife travel corridors? Or shall we build in the woods and save the farmland or the meadows? And it's not always an either or, but it's obviously choices have to be made. And zeroing in on that previous map, we see this part of land which was later developed in that way. You might see a similarity between the conservation areas shown in this map and the conservation areas in the subdivision. And that's because the township pre-identified these areas and relayed those ideas to the developer and said, we don't want to get in your way of building 100 houses or whatever the land normally supports. But let's look at ways to get the best of both worlds. All the house lots that you're going to be building in a way that saves the features of the property that really adds value to everybody else. So we're actually building a neighborhood in a park. And who could not like that? Another community from Pennsylvania that kind of pre-identified areas, in this case, areas of trees to save in the largely farming landscape, because the trees were pretty rare. So they said, the last thing we want to lose is our trees. So let's design around the trees, make sure they stay. And every developer saw the green map and knew on his property to build in the white areas and not to build in the green areas. They still got the same overall density and everyone is happy. Here's a countywide map from Orange County, North Carolina, near Chapel Hill, showing how the county has pre-identified primary conservation areas in green, that means unbuildable, and secondary conservation areas in yellow. Secondary conservation areas are buildable. They are not wet, they're not flood prone, they're not steep, they're buildable. But like the golf course in a golf course development, they would be that buildable land which is set aside to add value to everybody else. And when we do the 4-step design process, we like to begin with a site walk where we bring a site analysis map to the property that tells us where the soils and slopes and the trees and the wet areas and historic structures and everything else are on the property. Then we walk. This is a site walk in Allen, Texas I went on a few years ago. And here's a site walk I did in Sunnyvale, Texas, also in the Dallas Metroplex. And here's the beginning of the 4-step design process, which is key. Here's an aerial sketch of the property, and here's the yield plan. In this case, the developer would be normally building 35 lots, just like this. So 35 is the number. And then we go to the soils and the slopes, and we say, these areas here are wet or have very shallow soils, not good for septic. So we take these out of the equation right away. Areas look like that. Then we look at the buildable areas with arable farmland, dry woodland, historic buildings, nice views, and say, if we design around them, and we're going out on the site walk in buildable areas, walking around and seeing what should be saved, then we come down to with all of the potential conservation lands being in green and the development areas being in white. So that's the end of step 1, which is the complicated step, the most important step, the first step. The second step is to put the 35 homes in a logical area that captures views, that sells easily, that provides a great place to live. Then the third step is to connect those homes with streets and trails. And the fourth step is the lot lines. So this is a conservation design, and this is the alternative. This is the conventional subdivision versus the conservation design. Close-up view of the conventional development versus the conservation design shows the differences. Sometimes I am itching to sketch, so immediately after we walk the property, I put the tailgate down in the pickup and start sketching. When we do a presentation with people in the room, we will split the people up into groups of 6 or 7, and they all get to design their own subdivisions. They're using little M&Ms, moving them around to show the house locations. And they do this so that they can get an idea of how those houses might be situated before they hardline it and color it in with a pencil or a felt tip marker. So using movable houses like this is a great way for people to learn how to do this conservation design. Here we've got a property in Falmouth, Maine, where the developer said, I'd like to build 10 lots. That's what the normal lot size is. And the planner says, well, let's just look at the primary conservation areas in red. Can't build there anyway, won't perk, not a great place to put a house. And your secondary conservation areas potentially are in yellow. And the developer says, well, where do I put my houses? And the planner says, how about this? If you like short streets that are inexpensive, you like lots that look over a lot of protected open space to add values, how's that? And that was the way that the design process proceeded and really ended. Now, site features that are worth designing around might include really beautiful woodlands or individual trees, or maybe just a group of trees, not one tree of which is worth saving, but the group is in an otherwise open landscape. Farm structures like barns, streams and groups of trees around the streams, farm roads. This is a farm road in Allen that we designed around in a conservation subdivision up there. This is a farm lane that could be a great place for a trail in a conservation subdivision. This is a picture from Arkansas. Or maybe a ditch. Well, what's worth saving about a ditch? Well, number one, water's got to go somewhere. Number two, use your imagination, and you can put an ingress road on one side and an egress road on the other side, and have a boulevard in the middle with water running down it. Then you plant it up nicely, and then you've got something that really has a lot of value instead of something that looks pretty boring. So I usually try to go with what I have and then supplement it when necessary. Or there may be wildflowers like these trout lilies from Allen, Texas, or these meadow flowers, again from Allen, or this snow on the prairie from Sunnyvale, all subdivisions that I've designed, or it might be a field of bluebonnets. And there's my favorite daughter there taking a close-up view of the bluebonnets. Rural conservation design, what is it not? It's not clustering. That's an old way of shrinking house lots a tiny little bit and getting only a tiny amount of open space. It's not a PUD where the open space is mostly unbuildable wetlands or floodplains, and it's not a golf course development. So it's not this, and it's not that, and it's not that. Those are other things. Conservation subdivision design is not a golf course, it's not a green desert. This is an example. I'll show you a few, and then we'll break for some questions in about 5 minutes. This is at the one house per 5 acres, 5-acre lots. All the farmland is preserved in the lower half. And then the houses are at the edge of the farmland, at the edge of the woods, and the top half is woods. So we're saving a lot of woods, we're saving all the farmland, and the homes are right in between, getting great views of the farmland. This is a view of the county road going past the property. So after development, it looks like this. We don't see farm fields with a house every 5 acres kind of, destroying the rural landscape and giving the person way too much land to manage. So these are some of the original barns preserved, and some of the community agriculture that's occurring with the neighborhoods. Horses still live there, cows still live there. Here are the homes at the edge of the farms, at the edge of the woods. This is a view from your house. There's a veranda looking over the protected view shed. And the developer got full density, and it looked like this. So it's a very excellent example, I think. Also in Virginia, with 4-acre zoning density. Here's a subdivision I designed near a Civil War battlefield. And it looks like this today, with the development still all in the southern third. And the farmland has now been converted to a peach orchard, which is pretty nice. So the farmland is still doing its job, growing peaches now instead of soybean or corn. These are the homes looking over the soybean or cornfield before the orchard was planted. These are some of the homes in a corner of the development. There were a few more trees. And this is looking out from that house over some of the farmland. In Maryland, the Paternal Gift Farm is a bit denser, 1 house for every 3 acres, but there are 1-acre lots in a 3-acre zoning density. And it's an equestrian subdivision that a friend of mine designed. I participated in it to some degree. Here's one of the homes, a view from the house, and a view from a patio. So one of the great things about conservation subdivisions is it's really easy to sell homes there and to ask for and to get, a premium price. It's also got lots of trails. And I think I'll close this first half with my first Texas example, a subdivision I designed in Flower Mound about 10 or 12 years ago. It's on public water, has on-lot septic. It was basically going to be 2-acre lots before the developer said, hey, let's do conservation design and do 1-acre lots with 50% open space. And this is how it turned out. The entrance is on the right, and we go through, and the road snakes around a long meadow, and then turns south, and then crosses a little brook, and then turns northwest and goes up to a big cul-de-sac with lots of trees. So you can see there's 50% open space. This is the entranceway from Cross Timbers Road. This is the street coming in with the great meadow on the left and the homes on the right. Typical view down the road, which was designed to curve around significant trees. Another view inside the development. And another one. Again, the aerial photograph showing what this how this is laid out and how we designed around so many of the trees. This is the cul-de-sac at the end, and you can see we made a really big turning circle to keep those 3 live oaks there and healthy. This is down by the pond, which has got a natural border with milkweed frequented by the monarch butterfly. And the first lot coming in is what we call a conservancy lot. It's way big, it's 10 acres. And the developer got to essentially develop a small part of the conservation land through this conservancy lot technique, which says no more than 10% of your conservation land can be developed, and it can be a large, 10-acre lot that is extremely high value. And we wanted to put this out front, so that's the first thing people see as they come in. So that's one way of handling it, and we're at about a halfway point. So what I'd like to do is to open it up to questions and then resume with the slideshow.
Thanks, Randall. Jeff, while I stopped sharing Randall's screen, and before we get to questions, do you want to say a few words about the overall project?
Yeah, great. I'd love to. Thanks, Kara. Just to reintroduce myself, I'm Jeff Barton. I'm one of the partners at Gap Strategies. I'm also the project manager for this project for Hays County. Hays County went out for a request for proposals and selected our team to work on a way to incentivize conservation development in Hays County. We're really thrilled to be a part of it. It's a great idea. And many of us on this team have been working on this, as many of you in the audience have, for more than 20 years, for more than 30 years, looking at ways to save parts of the Texas Hill Country and the Texas Blackland Prairie. Gap Strategies is a planning, policy, and community outreach firm that works all across the state. We just happen to be located here in Hays County, so it's really personal for us. And I want to mention our team members: the Siglo Group, Doucette & Associates, SWCA, DPFG, TBG Partners, and of course, Randall Arendt. Randall and I met now 20 years ago working on just these kinds of projects. So we're really excited to be back at it here for Hays County. And again, looking at ways that we can take the existing Hays County rules and find ways to both protect the public interest and incentivize a different kind of development here in Hays County, something that works both for developers and the public to create these conservation developments that you've been seeing Randall talk about with such eloquence, and that he's going to talk about again in just a moment in the second half of the program. The schedule is going to work something like this. We've already been working for a number of weeks looking at background and data and creating base maps that begin to map Hays County for the kinds of overall maps that you saw Randall talk about, the kinds of geospatial compatibilities and framework that Randall talked about across a regional level, to look at fragmentation of lands, to look at interrelationships across Hays County. So we're going to be working with your county officials, or for those of you who are from outside the county, with Hays County officials and Hays County electeds, to look at how this might work over the long run, how we create new patterns of development and new ways to look at old relationships here in Hays County. We'll be testing these ideas out on real parcels of property with a charrette and some design workshops later in the fall. And all of that will be on the project website so that you can follow progress and suggest ideas. And Kara's going to give you in a moment places where you can make recommendations as we go along and follow our progress, read about what's been happening. You can submit those questions again on the website, and we'd love to have your ideas. Many of you are knowledgeable in your own right. Many of you are experts in your field, either construction or in conservation. So we'd love to have your ideas about what you think might work or what you've seen work elsewhere in Texas. And we hope you'll submit that and share your insights with us. We also know that many of you have questions. We've gotten tons of questions already online, and we're going to get to some of those right now with Kara. So Kara, do you want to start asking those questions? I'll say that we're going to ask a few of those now, and then Randall's going to go back to some more of his presentation, and we'll get to the rest of the questions at the end of the presentation. We've already gotten about all the questions, I think, Kara, that we'll have time to get to, right?
We have. And we'll go ahead and kick some of those questions off right now. Randall, the first question we have for you is from someone who has been following your work for 25 years. They're asking, what is trending and what is being learned, particularly in getting developers to adopt and execute these approaches, and municipalities and counties which have only asked for voluntary compliance?
Well, in Flower Mound, for instance, the government, local government, I don't know whether, probably a city, it might be a town, I'm not sure, decided to convene a conference at which they invited me to speak, and they invited Bob Engstrom to come down from Minnesota. He's the one that invented the term twice green. And Bob gave a presentation from a developer's point of view. And he said, this really does work for me. I've done quite a number of them. And he explained it in developers' words. And then I was asked to talk about sort of the design aspects and how communities might help to encourage this. Flower Mound, not being a county, but being a municipality, was able to, write the ordinances, and they, and this is front and center in those ordinances. But it began with a conference where developers were invited to come specifically. And I've been invited, by ULI to speak to developers, by the home builders to speak to developers. And it works best, I think, when someone from my end, which is sort of the design end, speaks on the same podium or the same Zoom platform these days with a person that has actually done this type of development and can say, it's worked for me. In Flower Mound, the developer, Willard Baker, who sadly passed away a year or so ago, had done a second one, like the one I showed, Chimney Rock, because he said, this is so good. He said he wished he'd learned about it 20 years ago. He only learned about it when he came to the Flower Mound conference. He said he was a Dallas developer. And he came to the Flower Mound conference, and he was already 65 by then. And he said, I'm not too old to learn. I want to do it. So we worked together and we did it. And then he asked me to help him with a second one. And he was getting, beyond 70 at that point. He said, well, I'm not so sure I want to do another development. I kind of want to rest a little bit now. So I think that's the way to get developers interested, is to have other developers who've done it give presentations and be able to speak the language of local developers.
That makes a lot of sense, Randall. And I want to flip that and ask a question that someone submitted. So you touched on developers, but how do you inspire community leaders and elected officials to think creatively and proactively about solutions to sprawling, unplanned, and uncoordinated growth? Often the lack of county authority here in Texas is held up as a reason why their hands are completely tied and they can't influence development practices.
Well, I believe in asking the people what they'd like to see. What would they miss if next year or 10 years from now, 500 acres of land in their community was developed, as it probably will be in many parts of Texas, particularly the I-35 corridor? What would they miss? And the people will probably say, well, we miss the views of the farmland, or we miss the animals, or we miss the rural character. And we all know you can't say no to development, because developers and landowners have a right to develop their land, and unless it's a floodplain or some high hazard area, a wetland. So we can define what people want to save and work with developers to save that At the same time, developers get their full normal density, just like a golf course developer would do. He gets his density, but he shrinks the lots in order to get the golf course. And the conservation developer does the same. He trims the lot size. In Flower Mound, Willard Baker trimmed it by 50% from 2 acres to 1 acre. He had public water and on-site septic. So I think that's one way forward, is to ask the people in the community, what would they like to save? And let's work on a strategy to do that that's fair to the landowner and fair to the developer.
Beyond asking the people, do you see any other role that local governments can play in encouraging conservation development?
Well, I think they can work toward creating incentives, and Jeff and I have been talking about them quite a bit over the last several months, and the report is going to get into that in some detail, but we try to incentivize this and make it as easy and fast for developers as possible, in a framework of identifying the open space first, so that doesn't become kind of the leftover bits and pieces. I think that we make the procedure as uncomplicated as possible and provide as many incentives as we can.
So what are some lessons learned in your experience on supporting local work most effectively as part of a larger regional effort?
Well, regional efforts, I think, are important to create a framework within which the local governments or the local decision makers work. So I like to see sort of a countywide vision of, maybe it's a greenway vision like they did in Orange County, North Carolina. Where would we like to see corridors preserved? And the obvious thing, when we saw the example from San Marcos earlier on, that was like a linear park, linear greenway along a riparian corridor. Well, let's go beyond the wet areas and the flood prone areas and say, let's look at conservation subdivisions along that corridor so that they can expand upon the open space that would be preserved, which would be, in the absence of anything else, just the floodplain or just the wetlands. So we could preserve farmlands or meadows or woodlands, create parks that would be part of those subdivisions, and that would be part of a regional framework that could, give people ideas of how these things might link up in 30 or 40 years, which is, development will begin to coalesce during that time period.
We have lots of questions for you about specifics, specific incentives, regulatory authority, but I want to ask one more just general question, and then we'll get back to the remainder of your presentation before we dive into more of these questions. This last question is, can you give examples, and I think you've already touched on this in your presentation, but if you could flesh it out for us a little bit more on how well are conservation developments working across the United States today? Oh,
they are working really well. I don't know of a single one that's failed. I can tell you a number of golf courses that have failed. It's a game that's losing popularity. Just sort of a natural order of things. Conservation subdivisions don't require large homeowner association dues to maintain, like a golf course does, big dues. So there's really nothing not to like about them. You get to live in a park-like setting, and you don't have huge, maintenance costs, because the farmland pretty much takes care of itself. You rent it to a farmer. The woodlands pretty much take care of themselves, but you want to have some control over the invasives and do some monitoring, maybe some prescribed burning to keep it healthy. But conservation subdivisions have been going great guns for over 4 decades in several specific areas that I know of, going on for that long. One would be the Milwaukee region, Waukesha County, Wisconsin in particular. Another would be the Philadelphia area, particularly Chester County, and to some extent, Berks County and Bucks, I would say, yes. Then in Hanover County, Virginia, the last I heard, which was 5 years ago, the county had saved 5,000 acres of land with conservation subdivision design. They basically began with a 5-acre density and told developers, well, you can have a 4-acre density. That's a 20% density bonus right off the bat. And we want you to basically reduce lots to about 1 acre. So about 70% of every conservation subdivision became open space. And you're able to do that when you've got 3, 4, 5-acre densities. Can't do that in a place like Flower Mound with 2-acre densities, or in a lot of incorporated areas where you can do conservation design, but they're already building half-acre lots or quarter-acre lots, and you can't get a high percentage of open space, but you can do some really quality design and have places like Hemp Hill Park or Bradfield Village Park or Fergus Park that we showed earlier in the built-up areas with water and sewer.
Thank you so much, Randall. Those are great questions that we've gotten submitted and some really good answers. Let's get back to your presentation, and then we'll have time for more questions at the end.
Okay, screen sharing, and we'll get this going. I'm in the advance. It's not advancing right now. There it goes.
There you go.
Privacy lot at Willard Baker's Chimney Rock development. So you can see it really gave a big buffer along the road, the Cross Timbers Road on the right. And it was the first thing that you see when you come in, and it sets a very high, elegant tone. Very quickly, just photographic examples from Colorado, Wyoming, and a number of Western states. This is what they look like, and this is why they've been popular. Those are the homes just below the brow of the hill. Wildlife still runs through there to everyone's delight, in fact. So the homes are much closer together, you see, than they would be on 5-acre lots. They're not crowded because it's still a fairly low density. And there are horse trails, equestrian opportunities. Springview Farm is more urban than any of them that I've shown yet. It's about 1 house per acre overall. It's on public water, on public sewer. It's not far from Salt Lake City. You can see the Greenway running through it, north-south and also east-west. It's a great subdivision, one of the best in the state of Utah. And this on the left would be the paved walking path for jogging and bicycling. Again, wildlife, people on the walking trails early in the morning, people fishing, walking their dogs, just a great place. You can imagine living in a house there. Now, again, these homes are a little bit closer together than the previous ones because it's 1-acre zoning. So these homes are essentially on maybe half-acre lots, maybe 25,000 square foot lots. Like a golf course development, everyone's got a great view and access to the open space. Stratford Hall is about the same density, 1 house per acre. The developer asked me to redesign this. He said, I don't want to build this, he said. I bought the property with this approved plan. What can you do? So we walked the site with the planning board and the developer and came up with this. Same density, a large conservancy lot as at the Flower Mound example to buffer it from the road, and then a woodland preserve on the far west, and the homes in the middle with almost every house getting a good view of the open space. Sold very well. Every subdivision in this development since then, and that was about 15 years ago, has been a conservation design. I don't think the town actually had to have ordinances. The developers saw how good this was. And if you don't, developers in your area should call up the developers in Weddington, North Carolina, right outside of Charlotte, say, how's it working for you guys? And I'm sure they will tell you, we love conservation subdivision design. Even if the ordinances weren't there, we'd do it because it's the golf course development without the $10 million cost of creating the golf course. So this is it from the air. the conservation woodlands and pond on the left, the conservancy lot on the right. Typical house. When we have to use septic systems, which is the next level sort of development, we look for the best soils in the property. So here we've got public water, but on-lot septic, and the septic is in the field on the left-hand side of the picture. And on the right-hand side are some wetlands which look a wildlife refuge, which looks down to the Hammonasset River. It's on the Connecticut coast. So here we've got the big open space with the homes on maybe 8 to 10,000 lots, 10,000 square foot lots in a 1 acre zone. So they've been reduced by about 75% in size. And the lots are very small. You get a house, you get a septic tank, and your drain field is in the open space you see right in front of you. This is a schematic of what it looks like. Individual drain fields in the common open space. Now you could do community drain fields too. That's an option, but individual drain fields are sometimes the developer's preference. No big upfront costs. So here's another shot of that drain field area, which is the buffer between the road on the far, far left and where the house lots begin, which is that yellow white fence. Now here we see homes on basically 1/4 acre lots. And if I didn't tell you this was only 20 years old, you might think, well, that's 200 years old. That's a nice traditional colonial New England village. No, it's built in the late 1980s. But that's the type of look you can get if you want it with very flexible frontages, very flexible setbacks, a great result. So here's a schematic showing the house and the septic on the lot and the individual drain fields in the open space. Canterbury, again, is 1 acre zoning with community well, community septic. And I wanted to show you an example where people don't have to have huge incomes. Although when you go into the development, it looks like you're driving up the estate road into somebody's country property. You're driving into a 16 acre parcel with 16 homes on 1/4 acre lots. And these are starter homes or next up from the starter home. So clearly we're not into the McMansion mode here. And we're families with small kids, as you can see, kids on tricycles. So conservation subdivision design can certainly be done for people of any, pocketbook size. Here's your backyard looking out onto a farm field, and the farm field looking back to the houses. Pines is another one I designed at 3 dwellings to the acre, but instead of there being house lots of about 15,000 square feet, they're more like 7,000 or 8,000 square feet with 50% open space. Designing around the trees, designing around areas where the developer actually, who lives on the property, it's part of his large country property, he has a herd of reindeer, which he raises for 2 things, venison and the antlers. This is a cul-de-sac circle where they kept the trees there, and we created a stormwater detention area in the middle of the cul-de-sac circle. And here are homes backing up on very small lots, backing up to a wetland. Lots of trails there. It's one of the great things about the Pines and North Oaks. And Summerfield is, again, higher density. It's more than 2 to the acre. This is a variety of house sites. It's at the edge of town, right at the very edge of town, with public water, public sewer, post office right there. Post office in the upper left-hand corner. It's a blend of single family, 2 family, 3 family, and 4 family, and has the highest sales velocity of any subdivision in Chester County, Pennsylvania, because the developer is really smart. He built something for everybody. As I said, single family, 2 family, 3 family, 4 family, and it's built around an equestrian theme. So every house looks out onto a horse pasture, which is really nice. On the left, you see a 3 family house. In the middle, you see a single family house. On the right, you see a single family house. They're all built. They blend in together. It all works. And there's this a 3-family house. Looking at it from the state road that runs through the community. So this is the main public road. And instead of having driveways coming out the main public road, the driveways come out to a little common driveway there, parallel to the state driveway, and everyone backs up to the open space. Now, very typically, when you get a public highway or a public road, developers will back their homes up to it because they're not allowed to put driveways out onto it. And that is a real shame because people's backyards then back up to the public road, which is no treat for anybody. The people that live in the house, the people that are driving by. So everybody looks inward to the open space here. And you can just imagine yourself coming home after a stressful commute, after a long day's work, and then sitting on your deck and looking at the horses graze. Nothing more peaceful in the world. Holding your beverage of choice in your hand and just chilling out. It has playing fields, it's got playgrounds, it's got a community center. In the background is a community church. Developer built it all. And the secret was, this is at 2.3 dwellings per acre. And the secret was to put the homes on half the land and leave half the land for the horses. So we essentially have 2.3 horses to the acre as well, but they're spread out into all these paddocks. I'm going to close with a couple of examples of yet higher density, 5 dwellings to the acre, a blend of affordable, a blend of senior, and a blend of market rate. And you can't tell which is which. That's the site plan. This is what it looks like from the sky. That's an aerial perspective sketch. You see the Long Village Green running on the right-hand side. That's the Long Village Green. I can't tell you whether that house you see facing the green is affordable or a senior unit or a market rate unit. You can't tell from the outside. This is another view from the green of all these homes around it. So the secret here is not to build New England architecture unless you're in New England. This is in the Boston area. Build in your vernacular so it looks like it belongs in your area. And you just build a larger version of the house for maybe a multifamily, a 3-family, or a group of affordables under one roof. It's a large house that contains more than one unit. This is the connected New England farmhouse. You see them all around New England. We call it big house, little house, back house, barn. You can walk to your barn in January and not have to go out in the snow. And that connected architecture, typical of New England, is the perfect vehicle to put 3 or 4 dwellings in. And it still looks like a single family house. Pocket neighborhoods are built at 10 to the acre. They look like this, and they are wildly popular in the Pacific Northwest. These are not connected homes. They are all single family, freestanding homes, but they're built very compactly. You can get 10 of these on 1 acre of land, including the parking and including the open space. They're illustrated in my book, Rural by Design, which the county's got several copies of. And here's an affordable example of that, because what I just showed you is market rate. This is from Boulder, Colorado. And this is, in fact, more than 10 units to the acre, slightly more. The alley access in the back provides a way to get in with your car. So the homes front onto the open space in the middle. Now from the street, you drive by and it looks like this. You're looking down the Village Green in the middle, which is there, and there, and there, and there. Or you're looking down the alleys there and there. So here you have it all. You've got the alleys, you've got 10 to the acre, you've got affordable housing. No one that's moved into here has moved out in 17 years. They love it. I mean, this is the way to do affordable housing, and it's not expensive. You know, at 10 to the acre, you can do quite a bit. So I wanted to leave plenty of time for questions and answers. I've got, if we have time after that, I do have more examples, but I think this is the, you know, the meat of it. And I'm glad we were able to cover all of that.
Thank you so much, Randall. I I wanted to get into a few more questions. As Jeff mentioned earlier, we have more questions than we can get to today, but I wanted to cover as many as we can in the time that we have. Before we get into that, I want to remind everyone that if they want to make comments on the plan or if they have additional questions, they can go to our website, which most of you are viewing the live stream on, hayesconservation.com, and go to the comment page and you can submit your questions or suggestions there. I'll repeat that website at the end, but it's hayesconservation.com. Randall, our first question for you is, most people who move to the Texas Hill Country want to have their own acreage, even if it's just a few acres, rather than have nearby neighbors with a bunch of shared open space. How do we account for this preference while pursuing conservation developments? Randall, our first question for you is,
Well,
most people
I think that you speak very accurately for a good section of the housing market. But I would say that the section of the housing market that is not being served when developers do exclusively that pattern are the other people. And they may be the people that used to live on 3 or 5 acres and decided, oh my gosh, I can't stand this any longer. I thought I liked this, but after 10 years of driving my riding mower around in ever diminishing circles, I'm really fed up. I'd like to have some neighbors. Now I'm 60 years old. I liked it when I was 40. We had, 3 kids and 5 dogs and a horse, and it was perfect. And for those people, there's a lot of housing stock just like that, and more will obviously be built. But there are people that have been there, done that. There are other people moving into the hill country and saying, we love the hill country, but we also would miss our neighborhood where we used to live. So we want to have the best of both worlds. The housing market is very diverse. When new urbanism first came in, people said, oh, people will never live on those 5,000 square foot lots. And it has been a phenomenon that no one could have foretold. There was an untapped area of the market, which new urban developers figured might be 15%. I think it's more like 30%, the people that really like that lifestyle. But you don't know what it is until you do it. I mean, Willard Baker sold his lots like hotcakes. If I were a developer in Hays County and I was considering maybe looking into this, I'd call the town planner up in Flower Mound and say, I think it's Matt Brown, or maybe he's the environmental planner. Say, which developers have done these that I could speak with about their experiences, developer to developer. And Flower Mound, if I'm not mistaken, has got quite a few of these. I happen to know 2 because I designed them, but I believe they've got quite a number. And the developers up there probably have a lot of stories to tell. Hopefully, most of them really good.
Thanks, Randall. Our next question for you is, after a proposed development has established primary and secondary conservation zones, is there a maximum amount of development density where you would not call the development a conservation development? Or where is the line between a development with conservation dressing and a real by the books conservation development?
Okay, excellent question. I should have said, of course, maybe 10 minutes ago, that these that are done at the density of overall 1 house to the acre, or 3 houses to the acre, or 5 houses to the acre, or 10 houses to the acre, they're not conservation subdivisions, but I call them green space developments, open space developments. And they are really, really good for incorporated areas where you get public water and sewer. You can build at, 2, 3, 4, 5 or more units to the acre. A conservation subdivision, I think, breaks off at about 50% open space. So if you can do 50% open space at 1 acre zoning with public water or public sewer or both, that's I would call that a conservation subdivision. It's more about the percentage of open space. And when I show you the last few, they didn't have anywhere near 50% open space. And Hemp Hill Park doesn't either. They're not conservation subdivisions, but they're an example of the value that gets added to the lots, which is I wanted to bring out that point. So when you get over 50% of the buildable land being conservation land, that's my rule of thumb for a conservation subdivision. So if I got a piece of ground that's 100 acres and 20 of it is floodplain, I'm looking at 80 acres of buildable. And I'm trying to get all the density that would normally go on the 80 acres of buildable on 40 acres of buildable. And then the net result is I've got 40 acres built at the double density, full density. And then I'd have 40 acres of buildable as open space and 60 acres of floodplain as open space. I'd have 60 acres of open space, 60% of the 100. If I had zero floodplain, it would be more like 50-50, 50 acres in development, 50 acres in conservation, with, again, the houses going on lots that are 1/2 the typical size.
Is it possible to shift building envelopes once they've been established a conservation easement?
Conservation easements are key so that the land which is in the conservation areas remains such. Sadly, when golf course developments were done 30, 40 years ago, no one thought that it'd ever be developed. I was down in Orlando several years ago at a ULI conference, a very small seminar, and everyone there except me was a golf course developer. And they were saying, our golf course has gone kaput, so now we're going to put more houses on the golf course, and it's not going to be an 18-hole course. It might not even be a 9-hole course, but there's no conservation easement on it, and it'll just grow up to weeds. So I'm not sure that it really would have grown up to weeds, but there was no protection. So the developers went in and did the famous double dip. They developed it to the hilt to begin with, and then when the golf course failed, they came back for second dibs. With a conservation subdivision, that never happens. The conservation land is in a permanent conservation easement, runs with a chain of title in perpetuity. So it's the real deal.
And I think specifically, maybe Mark Kennedy, it's too bad Mark Kennedy's not on here, but I think it's going to depend specifically on the details of your conservation easement. So at least I've seen conservation easements that dictate the exact location of where the building footprint can be. And I've seen other conservation easements that give some flexibility to where that building footprint can be. Maybe I see Commissioner Smith on there. Maybe he wants to weigh in.
Yeah, actually, I would agree with your comment. I mean, we have a number of varied conservation easements here in Hays County, but throughout the state of Texas, we have conservation easements that are based off of percentages of overall land coverage, over impervious cover, over literally dozens of other requirements that are generally privately contracted on the front end. But what we're interested in, and the reason I was so interested in Mr. Arendt's comments, is the fact that we want to hear from you guys out there who are watching, because at the end of the day, we want to make this workable for our area and a means to an end. And whenever I say that, people move to our county because they like the culture and they like the overall conservation aspects of our county. The various rules that Mr. Arendt talked about in other areas of the country may not work here, but we may be very inventive and have some different ideas that could work here that could very well become examples out there. And the only way that we are going to know what those are if people like y'all who are working in the industry can come to us with some of those ideas, and we can weigh them in a valuable way.
Again, I think Flower Mound could be a good source of information. What's worked? What hasn't worked? Have they had to change their rules? What do developers think about it? What do the residents there, think about it? It might be worth a little field trip up there. It's a bit of a haul, but I know that you Texans are not afraid of distance.
Not at all. One thing I would add as well that was very impressive as a part of your presentation to myself anyway, your talk or your discussion about the specific architectural aspects of the homes that you looked at that were the 3-family homes or the larger developments where you have those multifamily developments that truly do fit into the architectural structure and cultural framework of that area. We have some very unique things here in the Hill Country that I would have never considered until I saw your presentation a moment ago that we could do. And I'm thinking, you know, compounded ranches, things like that, that those are known here in the Hill Country. Those are part of the culture, truly part of the architectural structure of our area that could be developed in a way that could be very profitable for developers. But at the end of the day, it reaches the conservation goals that we have here. But I found that very interesting. At least for me, that's something that stood out in your presentation earlier.
Yeah. Well, the more it looks like the real deal, the real Texas, the real Hill Country, the more it's going to really catch on in the marketplace. People are going to say, I like the look of this. And that's a big part of, marketing and sales.
Well, I will let us get back to questions, but the last comment I will have, Mr. Aaron, is at the end of the day, it's pursuant to us as commissioners here and residents here to be welcoming to everyone who moves here. But for me personally, I want them to know why they moved here in the first place, and we have a job to protect that culture once they get here and to promote that. And so that's the reason those aspects that I'm talking about are so important to me. I think that at the end of the day, if we can get folks to adopt that culture, adopt those views, the architecture, the cultural aspect of what we're talking about, I think it's a win-win for both the new residents and those that have been here traditionally.
Mm-hmm.
Jeff, you're on mute. I'm going to unmute you.
Thanks, Commissioner. And I would just remind everybody, one of the things that we're going to have on the website, one of the things the commissioners asked us to do is prepare some specific examples and case studies. Randall's been talking about what worked and what didn't work around the country. So some of us on the team, led by some examples out of Randall's books and his experience over decades in the industry, is to prepare some case studies of what has worked well around the country. And that's going to be part of our final report to the commissioners, and we'll be posting that on the website as the project progresses. So some of you who'd like details, this seminar today, or this town hall today, is going to be up on the website so that you can go back and watch it later. But also we'll have a report highlighting some examples from around the state, around the country of case studies of what has worked and what hasn't worked and why, that you can go back and see. So look for that on the website as well. And Kara, you might want to go back to some questions.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. We have a question here. It's pretty clear that a greenway corridor should be established in the Austin-San Antonio mega region to protect aquifer recharge areas and endangered species, but also to preserve the hill country beauty and recreational opportunities that make this region so attractive. The challenge is how to do it. Clearly, municipal zoning is one way, but in Texas, counties lack growth controls. Perhaps county thoroughfare plans could be used to reserve pedestrian and bicycle rights of way as they now do roads. Can we create a 4-county thoroughfare plan that includes such trails?
I guess, I don't know if Commissioner Shell is on, but I guess I could probably address some of that question. What I would tell you is that I'm not sure who the question came from, but they are correct in the fact that we as a county government have very little zoning authority. Traditionally in the state of Texas, that authority lies with municipalities. What I can tell you is that we work very closely with our partners in all of our surrounding counties, and there's been a great realization over the last number of years as to not only the special cultural aspects of our area, but more specifically the special geographic and water resource aspects of our area. And to this point, it's been very interesting in working with our neighbors, both to the east and to the south and to the north, as how we can preserve that. What I would tell you is that I know that I would be more than happy to work with our neighbors, and I'm sure Commissioner Shell would as well, to try to look at how we could do that. As far as some type of overall corridor or the establishment of that, that may be left to the legislature, since it's more of a regionalized issue. I will tell you that we work very closely with our legislature, and resource development and resource preservation, more importantly, has been important to our county. And I can tell you that we're happy to look at it anyway. Maybe Commissioner Shell might have something that he'd like to say. I saw him pop up here.
Yeah, thanks, Commissioner. No, I think it's a good question. I think there has been some work done on that. I think where we need to focus is working with all of the local entities in the area and with some of our planning efforts. And I'll use an example of something that's going on in the Wimberley area, which is our Wimberley Trails Initiative, and it involves a master plan for the Wimberley Valley connectivity for trails, so that it is identified of where the preferences are to connect. And in the opportunity that land becomes available or that development occurs, that we have that ability to speak with them as the county and say, you know, there's part of a bigger deal here. Can we incorporate whatever you're going to do with this property into some of these plans? And I think we would find that there would be a great demand to incorporate certain types of conservation development along corridors that have connectivity to trail systems that you can get on and spend some time. So I think it's just that collaboration between all of our local partners. But in order to do that, we have to have something in the form of a plan. And I think this is kind of where, you know, this starts us off on this seminar today, is how do we start developing those plans, whether it's conservation development or how to connect some of our conservation areas or parklands, whether it's via trails or, you know, other multimodal ways of transportation.
I would agree with that. The only other thing I would say is that at the end of the day, Texas, by its heritage and by our just the way we believe in things here, is we're very much a private property state. And the one thing that our county has really done is worked really well with private property owners and trying to establish incentivization to ensure conservation over time. Because at the end of the day, when we talk to individual property owners, the one thing we want is long-term growth, but long-term ownership in our county. And whenever I say long-term ownership, we want people to move here. But at the end of the day, we want them to love our area and to maintain and conserve our area as much as we did when we moved here the first time. And so the one thing that the thing that I believe is that we have to offer those incentives for conservation. And what I want out of this process, and what I know that Commissioner Shell and I have discussed in the past, is trying to find ways where we can have that connectivity while respecting private property rights, and through incentivization, not over regulation, we can maintain or at least reach the goals that we want for overall conservation of our culture and our property here in Hays County.
Commissioner, that's a really great point. And we have a lot of questions about how to incentivize property owners and developers. So I'd like to get to some of those. One of those is, since traditional development and sprawl are much more common in Texas, and builders or developers who want to do conservation design face investors who are inherently conservative with money, what strategies have you seen employed to convince financiers and bankers that conservation development is a safe investment?
Commissioner Shell, do you want to start off talking about maybe some investment opportunities or some investment incentives that we have discussed, or I can do that if you don't want to?
Yeah, you know, and I think it's good to kind of see where we have been. Now I'll focus on western part of Hays County and the Hill Country. And, you know, I think what we're talking about today is something we want to be able to incorporate in all areas of the county, which is fairly diverse. But when we look at just the western area of the county, especially that lies within the priority groundwater management area, which sort of is where our lot size minimums come from. And we've seen that the only ability we've had to incentivize this type of conservation development has been to allow greater density if someone would use rainwater, you know, in lieu of individual groundwater wells. And the focus being that we want to reduce the stresses on our aquifers, reduce the reliance on our aquifers, and we believe rainwater is a great way to do that. And so we have those, and Mr. Barton, who was a county commissioner at the time, probably was, I think he was involved in those rules, and we've seen it used a few times, but it doesn't seem to be enough. And so I think what we have to look at is what is next for incentives in order to, again, in the western part of the county, visualizing an area that has 50% of developable land conserved and it does not rely on our local groundwater wells. Rainwater is a great way to do that. So how can we incentivize that? Are there tax benefits? Are there ways that we could help them structure their neighborhoods in ways that they could utilize shared systems, or even shared wastewater systems that could reduce costs, and for developers, certain ways that we could allow the roadways to be constructed into more country lane style development that would benefit developers not have to construct such large roadways that require massive amounts of engineering and drainage work, et cetera. And so I think there's a lot of ways that we can work with the tools that we have now, but I do think that we're going to have to look to some more creative ways to get developers to understand this. And I think what Mr. Arendt has mentioned is that I think developers are going to see a demand for this type of product. People that move to the hill country today are moving here because they enjoy open space. And when they buy their home, they want to be able to have that view or to have that nature around them. And that's why they did it. They don't want to see someone's backyard. And so I think that if we can get developers to look at it this way, if we can get something on paper to show them, they will see that you don't have to develop every square foot of this acreage. And I know the acreage is expensive, and that's sort of the natural thing to do. But I think that they can find that they can do things less expensively. They can build the areas that are developed less expensively, and that there will be a huge market demand for that type of product, because that's why people move here. So it's a combination, I think, of changing the way development is looked at from the developer perspective, and then finding the tools that we have at our disposal at this time, and then looking at more creative ways to incentivize developers, and working with maybe even the state on some changes that would allow us to help them do these things, which we all know people are going to want. And there's also tremendous public value, especially in Western Hays County, when we talk about recharge features, the quality of our groundwater, and the availability of our groundwater.
You know, the other thing I would add to that is that whenever we talk about incentivization, I also like to talk about uniqueness. And the one thing that I would say is whenever we look at that corridor that we're discussing, and I know that Commissioner Shell mentioned Western Hays County quite a bit, you know, that I cannot talk to a new resident of Western Hays County that loves to say, I moved here just in time, can you shut the door behind me? We know that that door is not going to be shut, and they're moving here because of the uniqueness of the county, because of the unique attributes that the western part of our county possesses. Unfortunately, whenever they move here, the other thing they have is very, very unique hindrances or unique problems that they possess whenever they try to do that development, or that they try to put that house on the ground that they just purchased. You know, the old adage in Texas is, if you like the view, then buy it. And at the end of the day, I believe that through a conservation development plan, you don't have to buy all that surrounding property around you. It can be a part of an overall effort to do some conservation here that works. But at the end of the day, we as a county must find individual ways on individual parcels that we can impact them. And, you know, we love to say we're unique in Hays County, but no more so than in the western part of the county. And the shoe that fits here doesn't fit on the east side of Buda. And so we have to be able to have the flexibility as a county to look at what will work in the western side, what incentives work here, because the incentives that work in Wimberley and Dripping Springs will not work in Kyle or Buda, where they can do straight layouts and flat country and there's no rock and they have plenty of water and plenty of sewage and wastewater. We don't have those incentives here, but there are those issues, or they don't have those issues that we do, but we can incentivize other issues here, I believe, in order to create a conservation, I would say a conservation culture in the western part of the county that is well worth the preservation that we want to do.
If I can pick up on that issue, there are 5 or 6 questions that ask about what types of incentives might work in Texas counties, and particularly in Hays County, as we look at how to structure these new rules. Some of them ask about what kinds of incentives would be appropriate on the western end of the county versus the eastern end of the county. Others ask about what are the biggest regulatory hurdles that limit the use of conservation development practices, or what kinds of regulatory hurdles should be done away with, or how to promote conservation subdivision planning with developers. But all of them have this idea of incentives in common, and I'm going to group them all together here with Kara's permission. and pose this to the group. And I'll start on behalf of the team by just saying that we've been looking at a broad range of incentives for the county, things that would look at water quality, at flood protection, at protecting culture and character of the county, at financial responsibility and sustainability, at health and recreation, and in intergovernmental cooperation, how to promote all of those features, and perhaps creating a menu of options, as we've discussed with the commissioners, that might mimic the sorts of things you see in the LEAD program, for those that are familiar with that. But how to get to incentives is something that we're still wrestling with. Is that in density? Is that dealing with impervious cover? Is that dealing with financial incentives and the kinds of things that both commissioners were just speaking to? Commissioner Shell was talking about road diets and narrower roads. There are a lot of different ways to approach this incentive ideal. Randall, commissioners, do you all want to talk for the audience about the different ways that you might look at incentivizing programs? Randall, you might start off with how different communities around the country have incentivized people to look at promoting conservation design, and then we can bring it back to Hays County.
Well, they've used density incentives, as I mentioned, in Hanover County, where typically developers were doing 5-acre lots. They said you can now have a density, instead of having 20 houses per 100 acres, you can, let's see, have 25 at the 4-acre density. So that was a big. Other communities have said you can reduce your road widths. If you've got a very rural area out in the hill country, and it's a road that is, serving less than 10 houses, maybe a cul-de-sac or maybe not a cul-de-sac, you can make it of gravel and forget about the hot top. Well-built gravel road will last a long time with light usage. In fact, the Vermont Scenic Road Study 30, 40 years ago found that it took 500 trips a day. That's like 50 houses to start to wear down the road, to the point that the town said, hey, we got to pave that. So this is way on the conservative side of saying 10 houses, maybe a dozen, it can be a gravel surface. And the gravel surface tends to be traffic calming too, because people don't tear down gravel road as fast as they would with a smooth asphalt road. The Conservancy lot is in Flower Mound, was a way of saying, hey, you can use some of this open space for a house lot, but it has to be a big chunk of land, no less than 10 acres. And you're going to, have it as like a horse paddock, or something that looks really rural. Then there are ways of, I think, working with the procedures, with the stages in the process, and how many days. And this might be covered by state law, and if it's governed by state law, you can't vary it. But if you can possibly expedite a development in terms of developers' processing time, time is money to him. There's an inherent incentive, or a set of inherent incentives, with developers that do conservation design typically get approval faster, because there are not that many people lining up to say, no, stop it, and thinking of every possible way under the sun to put a stick in the developer's wheel. Because when the public starts to see a conservation subdivision saving open space, they're much, much less inclined to oppose it and make a fuss. Developers have an inherent savings, an inherent incentive, because with a conservation subdivision, their street length goes down. If there are any utilities, the utility length goes down, because you don't have to run the streets and utilities all across the entire property. Their grading costs can go down when they're leaving, say, 50% of the land not as house lots, they don't have to grade that at all. It remains farmland, woodland, grazing land. So they're pushing dirt is pretty expensive.
Really good points, Randall. And I want to throw it to commissioners. We've gotten some feedback on chat that folks appreciate commissioners, you guys weighing in. So thank you guys for that. And we've talked about everything from finding ways the county might help with purple pipe or conservation to maybe some kind of, innovative financing. Would you like the team to talk about that, or would you guys like to weigh in on some of the different things the county's looked at?
Lon,
Yeah,
do you want to
sure.
start, or would you like me?
I'll take that just for 1 second. I think what Mr. Arendt just mentioned are some of those inherent values for the developer. And I think at this process, we can identify those and put those on paper, and we can show that. And I think that will go a long way. But I do think we will have to take that next step to some of those creative approaches, working within the laws that we have from the state of Texas. And we do have PIDs, public improvement districts, and this is something I think we will try to research. I kind of coined it as a micro PID or a mini PID, and we've seen PIDs that have been used in our area. It is a benefit to a developer, a financing mechanism for certain types of infrastructure.
Lon, can I stop you? Can you just explain, or instead of using the acronym, can you tell a couple of folks what PIDs are? Because there may be people on the call.
Public Improvement District is the definition of PID. And when we have larger developments, there's one near San Marcos, which is called Lacima, which is a PID. There's an assessment for landowners, and that assessment goes to serving the debt on all of the improvements for the neighborhood, whether they be sidewalks, water, wastewater, roads, etc. Not looking at something in that context, but in a very small context of telling the developer, if we want you to do all these things, if we want you to do a very specialized wastewater treatment and a purple pipe, maybe allow the reuse of some of that effluent to have some greener areas on some of the home sites or in the front yard or garden beds and things like that. And knowing that those are all expensive, that's expensive infrastructure. And to incentivize them to be able to do that, maybe we could look at something along the lines of a public improvement district that would be created over that property, which would allow them to finance that infrastructure. They could also use that to finance the construction of the road. Obviously, we're using that inherent incentive of that. Hopefully that road isn't going to be as expensive, but there still is a cost associated with it, and maybe that could be rolled up into it. And then also with the centralized wastewater systems, if we could find a way working along through the state rules to allow maybe the construction of that to be done through some sort of financing similar to the public improvement district. We might also find just another level to add, just another variable to the equation. And when you add them all up, you find true savings to the developer. And then I think what we've all identified is that marketability of that product is going to be in such demand. We're going to see people wanting to pay to live here. They're already doing it now. And we're going to have a better product that is more sustainable, that allows us not to develop on the backs of our groundwater and allows us to maintain the high level of water quality that we want, especially over some of these recharge areas, and also preserve habitat. One thing we haven't mentioned during these conversations are endangered species habitat. I think these ideas go right along with the conservation of our habitat. The county has a habitat conservation plan, which is an agreement with U.S. Fish and Wildlife. I think there are ways in which we could look at some of these developments to create habitat preserves, depending on the size of them, which could also be a benefit to a developer, because oftentimes that would result in an easement that goes to create a bank of those mitigation credits, which have value. And that value is increasing in the Hill Country as development has occurred across the Hill Country. And so I think that's another incentive that we could potentially plug in for some of the larger type developments, which we might see on some of the closer to some of the corridors, whether it be 35 or 290, that we could find ways in which a developer would have a benefit in setting aside large areas of habitat.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with my colleague. The points that Mr. Arendt hit, plus what my colleague hit, a couple of things I would say. Number one, whenever you talk about overall site cost, Mr. Arendt, like I cannot express what the difference in value on the east side of I-35 in Hays County would be in relative to the west side of I-35. And that you could not have a more night and day difference in what site prep costs are. You're looking at flat farmland on one side, and where we're at, you're looking at exceedingly high cost. The other thing that I would say is that as we move to, unfortunately, in my view, a more urban county, we have to look at increased public safety, which is very important to, I know, Commissioner Shell and myself, and earlier, actually at the end of last year in 2019, we actually adopted the International Fire Code here because of the population in our county. And over time, the changes relative to that, we know will add cost over time to business and to other structures within our county. But if we know that we have conservation practices that will be addressed in a way that really truly addresses the concerns that we have with public safety, our fire marshal has made a commitment over time to look at and adopt individual amendments to that International Fire Code that will address the incentivization of conservation easements or conservation development. And when we say that, your example earlier of paved driveway. When we talk about paved driveway, we have to have a certain width of pavement into any development. Over time, that is an astronomical expense at times to new developments. But if we have exemptions specific for these developers or for developments of this type to the International Fire Code that we would adopt at a local level to allow for gravel or caliche roads that have pervious cover, not impervious cover, those are incentivizations that direct individual dollars that are not having to be used on that development. That can be savings. So between site prep, between those kind of things, the other thing that I would say is as we look at more specifically the western part of the county, we do not have any type of municipal or general utilities that are available other than electricity in those portions of the county. As a perfect example, I had a property owner from the western part of the county come into my office less than 3 weeks ago and say, I've got 300 acres in the western part of the county. We would love to give you 2 acres for a fire station. So we'll give you 3 acres for a fire station. All we're asking is that you hook us into the municipal sewage and water line. The problem is the closest municipal and sewage and water line is almost 6 miles away from them. And so for us, we have to look at what those incentivizations can be and how we can look at providing those services over time without being a detriment to what that development could be in the future. And so there are different incentives we're going to have to look at. And again, we are looking to the call that we have today as an initial first step to try to find some of what those might be. I really like your idea about expedited approvals and those kind of things. I mean, I think the state of Texas has set us up on a very stringent timeline already. And I know that our development services folks are on board listening to the call today. But those are all things that we can consider over time.
I just want to jump in here, and it is about 6:06, and we've told people that we would be an hour and a half. So I think we have time for just a few more questions. We've gotten a lot of questions today about the legislature and the lack of control that counties have and land use authority, and how we could, within that lack of land use control, how we could still pursue some of these initiatives. I know Jeff has worked for the Texas Association of Counties. Jeff, you might head this one off first.
Well, I'll jump in just because I used to consult for the Texas Association of Counties, and in anticipation of this meeting, I talked with Paul Sugg, the legislative director for the Texas Association of Counties, and also with Aaron Sweener, who's the current state representative for Hays County. As Kara said, we got half a dozen questions about how Texas counties are enabled, what current Texas law is concerning the ability of Texas counties to regulate development or to require conservation developments. Also questions about how Texas counties control growth. A wide range of questions from people who are just beginning to get interested in the subject to people who are professionals in the subject. Let me just say that Texas counties, compared to other states, have relatively limited authority to control growth, have no authority to regulate typical zoning. They can zone in very, very limited authorities. They can regulate junkyards, can regulate airports, as the commissioners will tell you. Some Texas
Fireworks.
Fireworks, right.
Adult businesses, that's about it.
Sexually oriented businesses on the border. Texas counties have some additional authority along certain lakes in Texas and along the coast. They have some additional land use authority, but most Texas counties do not have the authority to regulate the height or the density or the kind of traditional things you associate with zoning. They got some additional authority in the early 2000s to regulate infrastructure. Hays County was among the first counties to take advantage of those and has pushed the envelope with things like conservation, development planning, and the sorts of things that the Commissioners Court is trying to do with this planning exercise. So in general, counties are pretty limited in the state. And as you project forward, I would say that looking at the next legislative session, and that's echoed by Mr. Sugg of the Texas Association of Counties and by the current state representative, if you look at COVID, if you look at the state budget that is going to be heavily impacted by COVID and a number of other issues, if you look at redistricting, which is going to be before the legislature's next session, a number of other issues that are going to be before the body next session, the idea that there would be a wholesale rewrite of land use laws, I think is a very, very slim chance. What's more, for those of you who follow the legislature, last session, most local governments were on the defensive, and there was, generally speaking, Texas cities in particular, but counties to some degree were in a defensive posture, and I think will be in somewhat of a defensive posture again this time in terms of looking at maintaining their revenue sources and maintaining local control over the authority that already exists. So I think the idea that counties would obtain vast new authorities to regulate land or vast new sources of income to implement that sort of thing, I would rate that as a slim indeed. There could be some changeover in the House. There's going to be a new Speaker of the House, but however that speakership changes, whatever party is in control of the speakership, whoever becomes the chair of county affairs, for instance, or the county land use and resources committee in the House, I don't think there's going to be major changes in the Senate, and there's not going to be a change in lieutenant governor likely or a governor. So personally, I don't see any big changes coming to land use. And if either the commissioners see that in some vastly different way, I wish you'd chime in now.
Thanks, Jeff. The only thing I would ask, and I mentioned it in our host chat, is that I think that, I don't know if all of y'all on the call or on the live stream understand that we truly have a mandate to approve, not a mandate to reject, or a mandate to, the state of Texas is a default state. In other words, if you submit something and it meets the minimum standards, then we as a county and as commissioners, we have a mandate to approve. And so at the end of the day, for us to make the changes that we're talking about on a daily basis, or to interact with folks on a daily basis to ensure that we want to make the changes to our county that we're discussing, because we don't have that statutory authority, it truly is an incentivization process. And that if we were a city, it would be very different, but that is not the universe that we operate in. And so I would just want to mention that as we have this discussion.
Thanks, Commissioner. It's a great point for those who don't really realize it. Cities, in a gross oversimplification, basically, when you come to land use, cities, particularly home rule cities, can do things that are not expressly prohibited by state law, and counties can only do that which is expressly allowed by state law. So there's a huge difference.
I just want to take this short moment. I know we're about to come to a stop, just to thank everybody again for participating, especially Mr. Arendt. It was amazing to get to see you in person here and learn from all of your knowledge on this topic, and we can't wait to keep working on this. I want to thank Jeff and your whole team. This has really been a smooth process. Kara did an amazing job. I can't imagine juggling the technology on that end. I've had a hard enough time just keeping my camera going here. So just want to tell everybody thank you, and thank you for everybody participating. I know this effort is worthwhile, and I'm willing to spend all the time I have on it. I know Commissioner Smith is as well. This is about the future of our home, the Hill Country, and it is extremely important. And I'm very thankful for all of those that are helping. So appreciate everybody.
Well, thanks for the opportunity to join you today from the great state of Maine. And I hope to be of continued help and assistance to Jeff and Kara and Sarah as they move forward, and only wish that didn't have to be virtual, but we could have all been together in the same room.
Agreed.
Commissioner Smith, I know that Commissioner Shell opened it up. You were going to close. Are there any last words that you wanted to add in summing this up today?
I just want to say thank you, not only to the folks who participated on the call today, but all those from our region who are interested in this. At the end of the day, the one thing that, or I guess it's a handful of things, but the things that we care about here are our culture and preservation of the Hill Country. I can tell you that there's no two people on our commissioners court who care more about the western side of Hays County and how to preserve both the culture and the environment that we have here. The Commissioner Shell and I sincerely appreciate you joining, and I know that I can speak wholly on behalf of Commissioner Shell to say that he believes the same thing. I cannot express my overall thanks for Mr. Arendt for joining us today. I mean, I think that we are very blessed to have someone with the level of expertise that he has to join us, not only to talk about what could be a possibility here, but what has been a success in other areas, and try to illustrate that for us over time. What I believe is that the team we've been able to put together with Kara and Sarah and Jeff along the way, we believe that they are the right team to help us truly preserve our county in a way that both promotes additional residents coming here, but really preserves both the culture and the environment and just the overall aspect of the Hill Country that all of us have come to expect and that we love. Again, thanks everyone for coming. Please take the opportunity on the website, and I want to ask Kara one more time to illustrate what the website is and those kind of things and where they can leave comments, because at the end of the day, your comments are where we're going to go back and request information from you to try to find some of those incentivizations or try to discuss some of those issues that you may have that we haven't realized yet. Would really appreciate if you could submit those. But again, just thanks everyone for participating, and thanks for our team for putting together a great presentation today.
Thanks, Commissioner. For those of you who are interested in submitting more comments or following along with the project or viewing this again, you can do it at haysconservation.com. There were also lots and lots of questions, over a dozen that we didn't get to today. We'll be trying to answer your questions. We're putting up a frequently asked questions page in the coming weeks. We'll try to answer some of your questions, and we'll be getting back to some of you individually. That'll be at haysconservation.com, and we really appreciate you attending this event. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.